Hey everyone, my name is Dr. Dolores Tarver. I'm a licensed psychologist here in Georgia, and it is time for the TT Time with Dr. Tarver is a wellness-based podcast. It is not intended to be a relationship substitute for a relationship with a licensed mental health provider. Welcome to this third week of March. I know that a lot of you are probably dealing with some temperature changes. Today, as you can see, I am in winter wear. I think last week I was in summer wear, or at the very least spring. So that is, we call that pseudo spring here in Georgia. So we're going to get a few more days of some cold temperatures. In fact, we have, I think, a freeze predicted for tonight. So for you all that are here, make sure you ensure those pipes don't get frozen so that you can make sure you can get those nice hot warm baths and showers. So we are in this March season and it's Women's History Month. And we are focusing on the phenomenal characteristics of women that are often associated with effective leadership. This is the Wise Woman series. And as I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do for this month's episode, I just realized how influential so many women have been to me in my life and how they have shaped me in terms of my values, my educational path, my experiences, the ways that I've learned how to be as a person, and those center around all kinds of values: courage, reflection, faith, being intentional, all of those buzzwords. So we have been talking about different things in this series. We've been talking about justice. We've been talking about the impact of hope. And this week I want to get into something, and this definitely I think is important on a lot of levels, and that is accountability. So, you know that in leadership, it is very important for you to have not only personal accountability, but accountability to others. And so, let's get into it as I discuss the necessity of accountability and the characteristics of it. So, each week I've been highlighting a phenomenal woman, and some of you probably grew up watching, if you're in my age range, you might have first been introduced to her on the Oprah Winfrey Show, and then later tuned in to see her fix people's lives. No other than Iyanla Vanzant. And one of her quotes that I like is, "Your willingness to look at your darkness is what empowers you to change." Because what does that talk about? That talks about that introspection and understanding that all of us have areas where we need to grow. The parts of us that we may not like to expose, we may not want other people to shed light on, but they're the parts of us that go with us too, that show up when we're afraid, that show up when we're in situations where we feel like we have been confronted, when we receive feedback, when we have to make decisions that are challenging. Those are the parts of us that are going to come through, even sometimes when we don't want them to. One of the things about Ayanle is, if you know anything about her, she has had a pretty hard life. Here, a woman born in the back seat of a taxi cab in Brooklyn, New York. Her mother was a railroad car maid. Um, and I think that when you think about how tough and difficult a life it must have been, this we're talking about the 50s. So you're still talking about people trying to fight for their civil liberties and being able to have access to equitable jobs. Her mother died from breast cancer just a couple of years after she was born. She was only 2 years old. She was raised by relatives on her dad's side. And she gets married, as we do, right, to people who often exemplify the characteristics of the life we've led. So her first husband was physically abusive. She had a hard life and looking for someone to make sure she's partnering with. They had three children together, and she left him, and she took those three kids with her. Here's a woman who became an inspirational speaker, a lawyer. She is a woman of spirituality and faith that she teaches. She is an author. She has been a life coach. She has been a television personality. So, all of these things, what did they have in common? They took some self accountability and they took some accountability to other people. So, let's talk about what that means. In order for us to be self accountable, that means we have to what? Know ourselves. So the self awareness piece is really important to who we are as leaders. What do we stand for? What are our values? What are the things that we draw the hard line in the sand on, that we're not willing to compromise on, that we're not willing to negotiate? What are the things that are of the utmost important to us? If I were to look at your checkbook, if I were to look at the patterns of the places where you show up, the patterns of behaviors that you have when people are looking and when they're not looking, what would they say about you? What kind of clarity do you have, this insight piece around who you are and the areas where you need growth? I was telling you all last week, I met with some very fine students. I got a chance to do some mock interviews with them, and some of them had amazing insight for their ages, and others had not quite yet developed that skill. Your personal standards, whatever it is that guides you, whatever it is that gives you your moral compass, if you will, that is going to be what shows up for you when you're in situations where you have to make decisions. And I think sometimes we struggle with, is this born out of consequence? Is this something that I'm choosing to do? Is this something that I feel like I'm compelled to do? Is it a reaction versus something that I've really been thoughtful about? Have I invested in my own growth? Have I allowed myself to be able to address those areas? We know that we all have some prickly areas to us, some challenges, if you will. Have I allowed myself to receive that feedback? And I think sometimes when we are looking at self accountability, we are thinking that that doesn't mean that we have to hear feedback from others. I know so many people that struggle with people telling them what to do. And I will tell people when I go and do training, someone is telling you what to do every day of your life. Every time you make a decision to get in a vehicle, someone is telling you what to do. They're telling you that you have to follow the law and the guidelines on the road. I know some of you think that speed limit is optional and that seatbelt is optional. However, continue to show up and not do the things that you're required to do as a operator of a motor vehicle, and you will have consequences of that. Self accountability means that I understand that even if I can get caught, somebody can see me, there's a video, that I'm still going to show up and I'm going to do the right things, that I'm going to check in with myself about, hey, was that the best that you could be today? Or were you showing up in ways that were convenient and comfortable? Because we get a little lax, we get a little slack. And then that means that we're no longer working on ourselves and we're no longer as invested in how we show up, because people will come to accept things over time about us. And you all have heard it, you may have said it, may have been said about you. Well, that's just how they are. Self accountability means that I'm not just going to accept that's how I am. I'm going to make a choice to hold myself accountable to being the best version of myself than I can be. And I think, what are some of the characteristics of that, right? Accountability means follow through. I talk a lot to you all about follow through because I think follow through is one of the things that we struggle with the most. We're in this Lenten season and you all may be going through it like I'm going through it. The shopping, giving that up, that hasn't been a challenge because I made a decision a long time ago. I need to get that under control, and this is just me following through with it. But when I tell you letting these chips and these french fries go because they are my comfort that I go to when I'm in times of stress and struggle, and recognizing that I have to have replacement behaviors, and this is not something that I'm just going to do short term, but these are decisions that I want to make for myself long term. It allows me to be able to trust myself. It allows me to be able to strengthen my relationship with me, because then I know that I can count on me when I say I'm going to do that for us, body, that I'm going to show up and do that. And there are challenges that come along with follow through, because oftentimes we may not believe we're capable of actually following through. Sometimes we've had such difficulty being able to be consistent and being able to implement change long term that we then begin to see ourselves out of the perspective of, I'm not one who can insert whatever. I don't have control over this thing. We talked about this previously as we were coming into the new year when we were talking about setting goals for ourselves and what interferes with us being able to reach those goals. And part of that is our self identity. Whatever we believe about ourselves, and that's your next thing for self accountability, is what is going to show up for us as we're trying to hold ourselves accountable. Because again, if I don't believe that I'm somebody who is capable of completing things, if I don't believe that I'm somebody who is going to commit to getting some exercise, if I don't believe I'm a person who can drink water because I don't like the way it tastes, if I don't believe that I'm a person who can make good choices about their food habits, then I'm not going to make good choices about my food habits. And I think that sometimes as we're looking at both follow through and identity, we are limiting ourselves because what we're saying to ourselves is, I will accept me in this way and I will be okay with it. Instead of saying, I absolutely can show up and be better for myself. And truthfully, I if you've ever received a text message or email from me, then I often will use please and thank you. I actually got that from a TV show that I used to watch. I still would watch some reruns of it from time to time. Kim Possible. And so her father, whenever he would talk to her, would say how important manners were, and that it's important for you to always understand that even if someone is in employment with you, or if someone is on a committee with you, serving with you, that there is still is an expectation that you will treat them with courtesy and with respect. And so, even though I may know that this is a responsibility, a job duty, if you will, that you have, I still will say please and thank you. One, because I recognize it's still a choice. Two, it allows me to make sure that I am communicating to you that I see you as more than just someone who is obligated to me, and that I also appreciate that you take the time to be able to do your job to the best of your ability. And these things seem small, but they really, when you're talking about that value system that we mentioned earlier, really are consistent with that. So, am I who that I say that I am? Am I all that I absolutely can be? And sometimes that means that I have to check my excuses because what will happen is I will begin to, I finished up seeing my last client, and some of you have children in that 20s age range, and you're having some challenges with them because they have a lot of excuses about why they're not quite ready to launch. And I'm not talking about deficits in any way. I'm talking about choices that our young people have made because they're comfortable being able to live in spaces where their parents take care of everything, where they pay for everything, where they navigate everything, where they manage everything. So there's this safety net. And there is a difference between guidance and enabling. And I think sometimes, this is the reflection in the mirror exercise, is that we're enabling people in our lives and we're showing up for them and showing up and taking care of things. And that is causing them not to have to show up for themselves. And being self accountable means that I'm aware that I'm making excuses to continue to justify my behavior because it just saddens me and it hurts me to set boundaries with people. Because some of us really struggle with boundaries. And one of the things about self accountability means that you have to be willing to make and have and keep boundaries, even if they're uncomfortable for you, and even if it means it may change some dynamics in some relationships. Because what ends up happening is if I keep making excuses for my behavior, and boundaries is just an example, then I'm going to keep on renegotiating with myself every time. And I will absolutely get to a point where I'll renegotiate it so much I don't even remember what the original goals were that I made. And I do think it's important for us to understand that in this journey of self reflection, self understanding, holding ourselves accountable, that it can be very, very difficult to see you in the mirror. That doesn't mean that you need to go and hide. That doesn't mean that you need to be ashamed. That doesn't mean that you cannot be the person who you want to see. But it does mean that I have to be honest about that reflection and realize that I have to change that reflection. It's not going to change itself. And there is, again, that difference between being compassionate and being complacent. And so, what I don't want to do is get say to myself, hey, I'm going to give you some grace. But then, really, what I'm saying to myself is, I'm going to continue to allow you to have those excuses. And I'm going to continue to create spaces for you not to show up for yourself and not to hold yourself accountable. And that does mean the realistic components of, again, who am I? And am I the best version of myself? And sometimes we're taking the version of ourselves that is the most convenient, that's the most comfortable, that's the one that doesn't have to push ourselves. I know oftentimes we have this conversation where we're talking about faith. I told you faith was kind of interwoven into this series, so I'm not direct specifically looking at it separately. But for those people who are people of faith, one of the things that I think we can get into the habit of doing is, well, I'll just ask for forgiveness. God understands my limitation. God knows my heart, right? And we'll start making those excuses for ourselves and not holding ourselves accountable to. So, am I going to continue to be in the same place 10 years from now? In 10 years from there, if I'm looking at myself and I see that these behaviors have gone across a pattern of decades and I'm still doing the same thing, then that's me making excuses. That's not me growing. That's not me being compassionate. That's not me giving myself grace. That is literally me putting myself in situations to do the things that I want to do. Because they're the things that are comfortable for me. And as we're in this series of, or this season of Lent, rather, understanding that there is sacrifice that comes along with leadership. And that sacrifice doesn't mean that you work yourself to death, that you burn yourself out. But what it does mean is that you understand that there has to be a separation sometimes between the things that you desire and the things that are in your best interest. And being a leader also means that we're in this political season as well. Recognizing when it's time for me to take a step back, recognizing when something is not for me in this season, recognizing that I've got some more growth that I need to do before I'm really ready to take on these things, and that it doesn't take anything away from me to say, this is not my season. Let me work on myself so I can be prepared for leadership moving forward. And that leads us into leadership is about being accountable to other people too. Now, if you've ever had somebody who you can say, now that person, they were a great boss, they were a great supervisor, they were a great leader, they were a great organizer, they were a great president, insert whatever role, then they were a great pastor, is you understand that there was something about them that wasn't ego, but it was about knowledge and wisdom, and also how they inspired and motivated other people to be their best version of themselves. And when you are personally accountable to yourself and you understand your strengths and you understand your areas for growth and you have a healthy identity and a set of values that are going to remain intact, it allows you to be able to be accountable to other people. So, what does that look like? One, it means that you are going to make mistakes. You're not going to get everything right. You're not going to know everything. There are going to be times when you absolutely feel certain about something, where you feel like you're making the right decision with regard to an outcome for a group. It may be that you have reviewed some things and you've had to make a decision, a judgment about something. You've had to give some consequences for something. You've had to put a proposal together, whatever the case may be, and you didn't get it all right. There may be times when you didn't acknowledge people. There may be times when you didn't give people their due credit, that you took responsibility for something that wasn't yours, that you didn't take responsibility for something that was yours. And so when we have those things happen, that it is incumbent upon us to be responsible for not only what we did, but its impact in other people. And when we acknowledge that we've made mistakes, that we don't, and some people have a hard time apologizing. And I think what happens in those particular cases is they feel as if it makes them look weak. It never makes you look weak to acknowledge that you have made a mistake, that you have harmed someone, whether it is intentional or not, because we know that intention does not negate impact. So it still has an effect. That you go and you say, hey, I need to get myself retrained on this. Hey, I have a consequence that I need to accept as a result of a decision that I made. That I realized it may result in me losing some privileges for a time and then having to come back. There is few things that are worse than seeing someone have to deal with something and they're not prepared to deal with it, and so then it becomes about their inability to be able to deal with the fact that they have consequences, or that things go in a different direction, and that people make a different choice. And so we want to be able to understand that being a leader means that we won't always get chosen, that you may absolutely have wonderful characteristics of leadership. However, you may make decisions, you may do things, and people want to move in a different direction. And that's okay. It doesn't take away from who you are. So, being able to accept that people also have autonomy and are able to make decisions that may be different than the ones that you would make, and that is okay. It's also important for us when we're being accountable to others is to set clear expectations. A lot of times we get very upset with people when they don't show up, and we will then talk about them and pass judgment on them. However, we never made their expectations clear. There are so many people that don't know what their responsibilities are. They don't know what their duties are. They don't understand their role in places because no one has taken the time to explain it to them. Places don't have manuals, they don't have guidelines, they don't have any resources. There's not a clear way of explaining things. People don't have the manuals that outline examples of things. They don't have points of reference. So people are figuring it out as they go. And if you've ever been in that situation, you know that's not a great situation to be in, because that increases the likelihood that you're going to make mistakes. But part of leadership is when I see that there is a deficit in that area and I have the capacity to be able to create something that I created and is clear so the people behind me don't have to deal with the same thing. I could get upset about the fact that it's not there, it's not in place, that whoever was before me didn't take the time to create a manual, set up clear training expectations, and ensure that people had what they needed. But if I'm now in that role, then I, moving forward, will ensure that that's there. And that's part of allowing other people to be able to follow through. We talked about us being able to follow through with our self accountability, but part of being accountable to others in leadership is ensuring that they are able to follow through, that you have a team that's clear about what the mission is, what the values are. I do think, and this goes with self accountability as well as accountability to others, it is very important for you to be transparent about what's happening, but also open to feedback. I know that a lot of times people say you keep things close to the vest. You don't let people know what your moves are going to be. You move in silence. And there are times and places for that. But that's not necessarily the case when you're in leadership. When you're over an organization, when you're a leader in a company, it's important that people know what you're doing. They know what your guidelines in. They know what your guidelines are. They know the left and right limits, as the military population says, so that they can be clear. When even if you look at a church, one of the biggest complaints about churches is what? Knowing where the money is going. This is why we have financial reports that people are able to see. The same is true for organizations. And oftentimes, if there's going to be something that causes a rift in a culture, it is going to be that lack of transparency around finances, around hiring policies and procedures, around the investments that are being made in certain groups or programs that are going on, and promotions, right? And so it's important for people to be clear about that and understand there's a clear rubric about how you're grading people, that people understand what you're holding them accountable to, means that you have to be transparent about that. That means you need to give feedback that's not based on whether or not you like the person, whether they are socializing with you, whether they are engaging with you in ways that you may be used to engaging with others. They may come and they do their work and they go, and that's okay. Right? Being in leadership and being accountable to other people means that you make space for that. There's different types of learners and there's different types of workers, and as long as a person is getting their job done and they're staying within those guidelines that they have been given, then it's acceptable for them to work in those spaces, even if it may be different than how other people work. But you also have to be open to feedback. as a leader, because you are giving guidelines, but that doesn't mean that there won't be feedback about them, feedback about these job duties and responsibilities, feedback about how much time it takes to get things done, versus what you all think the time may be done. Being able to, and this is why it's important as a leader for you to know the jobs of everyone whom you are over in any capacity, and that you would be able to function in that capacity were they not there if need be, because that allows you to be able to develop relationships with them, to see from their world, because oftentimes, we're sitting up, and some people look at leadership as meaning like I oversee everything but I don't actually get my hands dirty. You can't expect for people to follow you when you're not willing to do the same work that you're asking them to do. You also, as a leader, want to ensure that you're encouraging your team members to hold each other accountable. And I know I talk in training about this, that people think, oh, well, if somebody's not doing what they're supposed to be doing, I'm not saying anything. I'm not snitching. It's not snitching when you understand that all of us have a role in this team. And when anyone is not able to do their role, sometimes for health reasons, sometimes for environmental, situational things that may come up, but then sometimes because people are making choices not to. That puts more work on the team, and that also causes people to then be receiving less money for the same amount of work, right? So you're now you've decreased my salary, so now I'm doing all this work, but I'm actually making less for it because you have added some responsibilities that I'm now trying to navigate. And it's important for your team members to know that you're a safe space for them to come to, that they can bring feedback to you, that they're not going to be penalized and called out when they bring up things, that you have criteria that are consistent across the board, that it really is a performance review, and not these kind of aspirational things that we're asking, or things that don't have objectable data to go with them. That there is open communication, that there's collaboration. We don't want to get into groupthink. We don't want everybody to think alike. We do want people to be able to work effectively and well together, but we also want to make sure we're leaving space for people to be able to bring their own skills and talents. I don't want to tell you to keep doing the same thing over and over again. That thing may be outdated. It may not work. It might have worked well at one point. It doesn't work well now. And so I want to make sure that there's space for growth. I mean, I think it's always very important for us in the leadership role to make sure that we're leading by example. Because nobody wants to be told that they need to follow these policies and procedures, that they need to maintain a particular work ethic, dress code, standard of care, whatever it is, only to see that the other people in leadership are not actually abiding by those same guidelines. So, in this season of you being the best leader that you can be, then there has to be self accountability and accountability to others. And that includes an honest assessment of yourself as well as other people, that's based in objective data, not an aspiration, and definitely holds up the mirror to them and to you. All right. So you all do your very best to stay warm out here, and most importantly, be well.